November 8, 1983. A NATO telex arrives at Brussels headquarters marked Cosmic Top Secret.
Exercise Able Archer 83 begins in 72 hours. Across Western Europe, military commanders open sealed war plans they've never seen before.
Fighter squadrons receive deployment orders. Nuclear storage facilities go on alert. Communication switches to wartime encryption.
To NATO, this is routine training. To Moscow, watching from across the Iron Curtain, it looks like preparation for nuclear first strike.
In 6 days, the world will come closer to accidental World War III than any moment since Cuban Missile Crisis.
One Soviet officer will have seconds to decide whether radar signals showing American missiles are real or computer error. He will choose wrong according to protocol, and that choice will save 8 billion lives. But to understand how a military exercise almost triggered nuclear apocalypse, the story must rewind 18 months to a London safe house where a KGB colonel delivers a warning no one in Washington believes.
June 1983, London. Oleg Gordievsky, KGB colonel and secret MI6 double agent, sits across from his British handler. For 9 years, he's fed Soviet secrets to the West, while maintaining cover at the Soviet embassy. Today's intelligence stops the meeting cold.
Moscow believes NATO is planning nuclear first strike, not theoretical concern, immediate operational threat. Soviet leadership has convinced itself the West will attack, disguised as military exercise, within months. The paranoia is genuine.
The response planning is real, and the Kremlin is preparing to strike first if necessary.
His handler asks the obvious question: why would Moscow think this?
Gordievsky explains the timeline. March 1983, President Reagan calls the Soviet Union an evil empire in a speech. 2 weeks later, Reagan announces Strategic Defense Initiative, space-based missile shield. Soviet generals view SDI not as defense, but as offensive weapon. If America can intercept Soviet missiles, America can launch first strike without fear of retaliation.
Then, NATO deploys Pershing II missiles in West Germany. Flight time to Moscow under 10 minutes.
Soviet paranoia hardens into doctrine. The KGB launches Operation Ryan, Rakietne Yadernoye Napadienie, nuclear missile attack.
Every Soviet embassy worldwide tasked with detecting signs of imminent Western strike. KGB officers monitor hospitals for unusual blood stockpiling.
They watch military bases for troop movements. They track government officials to see if families evacuate quietly.
Moscow Center demands hourly updates. The Soviet Politburo believes war is coming, and they're preparing to go first. MI6 passes Gordievsky's warning to CIA. CIA briefs the White House. Reagan's advisors dismiss it as Soviet disinformation.
No one in Washington accepts that Moscow genuinely believes America would launch unprovoked nuclear attack. The warning gets filed and forgotten.
5 months later, NATO launches Able Archer 83, and Moscow's worst fears materialize.
November 2nd, 1983. 1 week before Able Archer, Soviet military intelligence, GRU, detects unusual NATO communication patterns.
Encrypted traffic volumes spike 40% above normal. Warsaw Pact listening posts intercept fragments.
New encryption protocols, mobilization codes, references to scenarios never mentioned in previous exercises.
Then NATO does something that's never happened before in peacetime. They practice transitioning from conventional forces to full nuclear alert, using actual command chains.
In Moscow, Marshal Nikolai Ogarkov, chief of Soviet General Staff, reviews the intelligence in a windowless briefing room beneath the Kremlin.
The patterns match everything Ryan warned about. NATO switching to wartime posture under cover of exercise.
If this is the disguise for first strike, Soviet forces have 72 hours to respond or face decapitation strike that destroys command structure before they can retaliate.
Ogarkov recommends moving Soviet nuclear forces to heightened alert, not full launch readiness, not yet.
But engines warmed, missiles fueled, bombers armed and positioned, submarines deployed.
The motion passes unanimously. For the first time since Cuban Missile Crisis, both superpowers will have thousands of nuclear weapons on alert simultaneously.
and neither side knows the other is reacting defensively to perceived threat.
November 7th, 1983, Able Archer 83 begins. In Belgium, American officers at NATO headquarters run through nuclear war scenarios with unsettling realism.
The exercise simulates Soviet invasion of Western Europe. NATO conventional forces fail to stop the advance.
Supreme Allied Commander requests permission to use tactical nuclear weapons. The simulation includes realistic radio traffic, authentic authentication codes, actual military units deploying to wartime positions.
The only thing that's simulated is the missile launches themselves. But here's what makes Able Archer different from every previous NATO exercise.
The participants include heads of state, British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl, American Vice President George H.W. Bush.
Their involvement signals to Soviet intelligence that NATO Command Authority is practicing real nuclear release procedures. Previous exercises used lower-level officials.
Soviet spy satellites track the movements. Reconnaissance aircraft at the edge of NATO airspace intercept communications.
To Moscow, every indicator matches the profile for attack preparation disguised as exercise. The pattern is perfect, too perfect.
Either NATO has created the most realistic training ever designed, or they're hiding real war mobilization inside fake exercise. Soviet doctrine assumes the worst case.
November 8th, morning. Soviet bomber bases across Eastern Europe receive flash traffic. Readiness level elevated to combat ready.
Ground crews scramble. Aircraft fueling begins. Weapons loads include nuclear gravity bombs.
Pilots report to ready rooms. No launch orders, not yet. But engines can be started within 60 seconds, takeoff within 5 minutes.
If NATO launches first strike, Soviet bombers must get airborne before mushroom clouds erase their runways.
That same morning, Soviet ICBM forces in Ukraine and Siberia go to increased alert. Missiles in hardened silos remain unfueled. But support crews move into position. Targeting data gets updated. Communication checks run continuously. Missile field commanders receive sealed envelopes. Inside are authentication codes and launch coordinates. The envelopes stay sealed. For now.
Neither side intends to start nuclear war, but both sides are reacting to what they perceive as threatening moves by the other.
NATO doesn't know Moscow has elevated alert levels because Soviet military movements happen inside closed airspace and restricted territories.
Moscow doesn't know Able Archer is purely training because the exercise looks exactly like real preparation for war.
The two nations are climbing escalation ladder, with neither realizing the other is climbing too.
November 9th, midnight. Sarpukov 15, a bunker complex south of Moscow. Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov sits before a console showing data from Soviet early warning satellites.
His job is simple. If satellites detect American missile launches, he reports to command, who notifies Soviet leadership, who orders retaliatory strikes.
The system is designed for speed. If American ICBMs launch, Soviet missiles must leave their silos before incoming warheads destroy them. Response time measured in minutes, not hours.
At 014 hours, alarmlar scream. The satellite system, codenamed OCO, detects bright infrared signature over Montana, United States.
Computer analysis conclusion. One American Minuteman ICBM launched toward Soviet Union. Petrov screen flashes red. Missile attack. Confidence high.
Protocol is clear. Immediately report to command. Command notifies General Secretary Yuri Andropov. Andropov orders full retaliation.
1,500 Soviet ICBMs launch toward the west. Nuclear war begins because one satellite saw one missile.
Petrov hesitates. One missile makes no sense. If America launches first strike, they'd send everything, hundreds of missiles simultaneously to overwhelm Soviet defenses. Why fire just one?
He watches the screen, heart pounding. Maybe it's malfunction. Maybe the satellite misidentified a reflection, a cloud, anything.
But the system has never failed before. It's been tested thousands of times. High confidence rating means 98% certainty.
30 seconds pass. Petrov doesn't pick up the phone. He's violating direct orders.
If this is real attack and he delays reporting, Soviet leadership loses precious minutes needed to launch before American warheads arrive.
But one missile still doesn't make sense. Then the alarms scream again. Second launch detected. Then third, fourth, fifth. Now the computer shows 5 American ICBMs inbound. Total flight time 25 minutes.
5 missiles. Still wrong. A real first strike would be 200 missiles minimum. 5 is too few to destroy Soviet command structure.
Why would America launch attack guaranteed to fail? Petrov makes his decision. He picks up the phone and calls command.
Reports possible system malfunction. No missile attack confirmed. He recommends ground radar verification before alert goes to Politburo.
The officer on the line asks if he's certain. Petrov says he cannot confirm attack based on satellite data alone. Ground radar shows nothing. American missiles don't exist.
He was right. The satellites detected sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds. Computer software misidentified the reflections as missile exhaust plumes.
But he didn't know that when he made the call. He violated protocol based on intuition and logic. If he'd followed orders, Soviet command would have notified Andropov within 2 minutes.
Andropov, already paranoid about NATO exercise and believing attack was imminent, would have ordered full retaliation. Soviet missiles would have launched toward America, while Able Archer 83 was still running in Belgium.
NATO would have detected Soviet launch and executed real nuclear response. Within 30 minutes, 2,000 nuclear warheads would be in flight. Within 1 hour, civilization ends.
November 9th, morning, Brussels. NATO commanders running Able Archer 83 have no idea how close they came to triggering actual war 6 hours earlier.
The exercise continues. Simulated nuclear release orders flow through authentic command channels. American bombers in Britain taxi to runways, engines running, as part of the drill.
Soviet reconnaissance aircraft watching from international airspace report the movements to Moscow. Soviet intelligence concludes NATO is moving to final pre-launch positions.
But then, Able Archer 83 ends. NATO forces return to normal readiness. Encrypted channels go back to routine traffic. American bombers stand down. The imaginary war concludes.
In Moscow, Soviet intelligence watches the NATO stand down with confusion. Did the exercise end, or is this another deception? Marshal Ogarkov recommends maintaining elevated alert for 72 additional hours.
November 14th, CIA receives after-action reports from Signals Intelligence. The reports detail Soviet alert levels during Able Archer. American analysts are shocked.
They had no idea Moscow reacted so dramatically. One CIA analyst writes in his assessment that this was probably the most dangerous moment since Cuban Missile Crisis, and we didn't even know it was happening.
Reagan receives the intelligence briefing personally. He writes in his diary that night that he'd been unaware of how frightened Moscow had become.
He makes a decision that will define the rest of his presidency. He needs to reduce tensions. The nuclear arms race has gone too far.
Both sides are too paranoid, too trigger-happy, too close to accidental war. He begins private communications with Soviet leadership, proposes talks, suggests arms reduction, opens channels that will eventually lead to Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, START agreements, and the end of Cold War.
But Stanislav Petrov, the man who actually prevented the war, receives nothing. Soviet military investigates the false alarm incident.
They determine Petrov violated protocol by not immediately reporting missile attack. He's quietly reassigned. No promotion, no commendation.
No acknowledgement that his judgment saved the world. The incident is classified. Petrov is told to never discuss it.
He retires from military in 1984, living on a small pension in a small apartment outside Moscow.
For 15 years, no one knows what happened on September 26, 1983. The story only emerges in 1998 when a Russian researcher finds declassified documents and tracks down Petrov.
By then, Petrov is living alone. His wife has died. His health is failing. When asked why he didn't follow protocol and report the attack, he gives a simple answer.
I didn't want to be responsible for starting World War III over a malfunction.
He trusted his gut over the computers. His gut was right.
Able Archer 83 exposed the fatal flaw in nuclear deterrence. Both superpowers built systems designed to respond to attack within minutes.
Both created hair-trigger alert postures. Both assumed the enemy would behave logically. But logic fails when fear takes over.
NATO ran a realistic exercise. Moscow saw attack preparation. Soviet satellites malfunctioned. Petrov saw missiles that didn't exist.
Everyone was reacting rationally to bad information, and rational reactions nearly killed everyone on Earth. Today, thousands of nuclear weapons remain on high alert. Early warning systems still monitor for launches. Officers still sit at consoles, ready to report attacks.
The same technologies that nearly failed in 1983 are still in use. The same doctrines that drove escalation remain in force.
We survived Able Archer because one Soviet officer broke the rules. Next time, we might not have a Stanislav Petrov.
November 1983 proved something terrifying. Nuclear war doesn't require evil leaders or intentional aggression.
It only requires misunderstanding, fear, and systems designed to respond faster than humans can think.
The closest the world came to ending wasn't Cuban Missile Crisis, where leaders knew what was happening and negotiated solutions. It was Able Archer 83, where both sides reacted to threats that didn't exist. The war that almost happened by accident.
Because someone ran a training exercise too realistic, and someone else was too frightened to recognize it as fake.